One Piece, the 1100 plus chapter titan of the manga world. What kind of idiot would decide to read it when they are this far behind? Well, I'm that idiot. Obviously there is no way I could do this all in one video, so today I'll start with the first review of many. We'll be covering chapters 1 through 68, so Romance Dawn to Baratie. I'll talk about what I loved, what I didn't love, and predictions about where I might expect the story to go. I recently made a video discussing my goal to start One Piece, and as soon as that video was uploaded, I began reading the early adventures of Luffy and his assembly of the Straw Hats. I read through the first 68 chapters in just a few days and took detailed notes on each chapter, but what I wasn't prepared for was that my perception of One Piece would be totally flipped in such a short amount of time. Before we get too far into the video, I'd like to take a moment to thank my channel members. Without you, this content would not be possible. Thanks to you guys, I can keep paying for my Jump subscription to enjoy this mountain of manga. This video shout out goes to SNES. SNES, thank you for recently becoming a member. Also, thank you for being a mod in my streams. I really do appreciate you, man. If you'd like to be a member and possibly get a shout out, check out the join button down below. Now that we've got this out of the way, let's start talking about my experiences with Part 1, Romance Dawn to Baratie. Like I said in the intro, my entire perception of One Piece did a solid 180. If I had read a more sizable portion of the story, I would have likely made a I was wrong about One Piece video, just like I had done for Jujutsu Kaisen. One Piece was something I judged just by its cover. Going strictly off of just appearance, One Piece always struck me as this goofy, happy-go-lucky type story, and this is not the case at all. One Piece is very far from the original mindset I had about it. One Piece has so much character. For every carefree moment, there's an emotionally hefty moment waiting to mentally guard crush you. For every ounce of action, we have a bittersweet goodbye. If someone were to ask me to explain One Piece, the closest visualization I could give you is like a 5-layer cake, but every layer seems to be perfectly balanced. Even with that perfect blend, I think early One Piece does suffer from the symptoms of pretty much every other shonen story. We have a few flavor of the week villains, and then start to get gradual build-up. Elvita and Captain Morgan are gone about as quickly as they appear. They serve their functions, but in the grand scheme of things, I imagine they are pawns for a larger picture. I doubt Elvita will come back, and I doubt we'll see much of Morgan again. Though, we did see Morgan in the Kuro flashback where he gets his jaw busted the fuck up when Kuro fakes his death and moves on to larger ambitions. But other than that, they don't really mean shit. Buggy didn't really do too much for me, but his purpose in giving a glimpse into the history of Shanks was great. I only got to see Shanks temporarily in the first chapter, but I really enjoyed his debut. Shanks is a great man, and I hope he continues to be a great man. His influence on Luffy is essential to the person that Luffy will grow into. I think that Luffy would have always become a pirate, but I doubt that Luffy would be half the man he currently is in Baratie. While talking about characters and their direct influence on each other, this is the perfect time to mention Don Krieg. There's a large emphasis in these early chapters about the characters and the idols in their lives. Don Krieg, while being a massive piece of shit, was largely influential to his battle commander, Gin. While Gin is not the spitting image of Don Krieg, Krieg is the motivating force for Gin to become one of the greatest threats of the Grand Line. Gin looks at Don Krieg as if he was the sun, but maybe more like a shit-covered sun. I don't see why he'd want to follow in the footsteps of an absolute asshole, but that's life. This is realistic though. Not every idol is the shining star that we think they are, and with Krieg, it's almost like the living embodiment of don't meet your heroes. Don Krieg gives a masterclass on how to be an absolute dickhead and have nothing but placebo power. He doesn't know true strength because he's only ever bought it in the form of weapons. He's compensating for his lack of character with shiny new toys. In my mind, this is not a man worth following, but I could be wrong. Maybe the current perception of Krieg is a man who lost his way, and Gin might know who he used to be, but we'll have to wait and see if DK and Gin really do rebuild from absolute zero. DK is not the first time we've seen a negative influence reign supreme over people though. Kuro and his absolute dominance under the flag of the Black Cat also led a group of people who were guided by the wrong reasons. Django and crew all sought to have the level of power and disgust that Kuro brought to the table, but when it really came down to it, they didn't have the stomach to cause those atrocities, and paid dearly with their lives when Kuro decided to team kill them on the North Beach. The most positive mentorships we see revolve around Luffy, Sanji, and even Usopp, though the case for Usopp is a little different. Luffy, as stated before, has the childhood mentorship of Shanks, which Luffy carries the light of positivity and courage going forward. Sanji has the guidance of Chef Zeph, or as he was known in his former life, Red Shoes Zeph. I think the case of Zeph and Sanji is the most fascinating to me. Zeph, as he's described amongst the various cast members, is known as a cold-hearted killer based on his blood-soaked shoes, but when he meets Sanji, his life is kind of thrown for a loop. He originally dismisses Sanji and notes him as being a worthless kid, but saves him on the premise that they both have a fascination for the all blue. When he looked at Sanji getting thrown overboard, he didn't see just a kid, he saw a piece of himself. He would have let anyone else go, but his desire to save his childhood wonder prevailed. And after they share the suffering of nearly 3 months of starvation, they have a deep appreciation for each other. Zeph might have saved Sanji in that storm, but Sanji saves Zeph in a nearly spiritual way, by reminding him that there's a life outside of being the cold killer chef that skimmed the Grand Line. In my pre-read video, I discussed that Sanji was my favorite character as a child. I think finally getting to complete these chapters really sold me on this character, and he is by far my favorite of the current Straw Hats. I obviously knew that Sanji is a part of the crew because it's not exactly a secret, but even I welled up when I watched Zeph cry upon their departure. My hopes is that they get to meet again, and maybe Sanji will be able to tell him tales of truly finding the mythical All Blue. Usopp has a different form of mentorship, as he's the leader in his situation. When we first meet Usopp and his crew of Carrot, Pepper, and Onion, we get the feeling that it's almost like a prankster setting a bad example for kids, filling their heads with crazy stories or promoting all kinds of goofy shit, but it's not really like that. Usopp is a sibling, an ideal older brother. He looks after these kids and does his best to be the strong mentor that he always wishes he had after his father departed and his mother passed away. Usopp made it a point to be the change he wanted to see in the world, and if he could protect those kids from the harsh reality of the world with his tall tales, so be it. And even in the end of the Syrup Village arc, you can see that Usopp's kind-hearted nature will steer them in the right direction. They all have ambitions and they carry his legacy on, running into the town to let the village know that the pirates will be coming. Usopp is to those kids as Shanks was to Luffy, and it's really just so damn heartwarming to see. I'd love to see an update about them in a cover story, or maybe Oda will have notes about them in the post-chapter questions. While we're on the topic of some of the more emotionally driven moments, I have zero shame in admitting that there's already been a handful of moments that brought me to the verge of tears. Since I just discussed Usopp's backstory a bit, I think we'll start with chapter 41. The crew gets the going merry, Usopp joins the crew, and we get the emotional flashback that explains to the audience why Usopp would tell the village that the pirates were coming. Usopp was never trying to hurt anyone, but doing his best to process. Instead of shutting himself down into a horrible depression after losing it all, he kept his head held up, ran into the village, and kept that dream alive. It wasn't about pranking the village, it was about spreading hope and trying to will his father's return into existence. I think this is by far one of the most relatable moments from the sections that I've read, as we've all lost someone that we wish we could just bring back with a simple phrase. I can't stress this enough. Usopp is a wonderful soul, and I think this is easily one of the strongest chapters in early One Piece. The next moment that would shred my heartstrings would have to be in chapter 52. Zoro had just suffered a defeat to the world-class swordsman, Mihawk. Mihawk respected Zoro enough to not kill him, because he wanted to see Zoro flourish into one of the greatest swordsmen of all time. And even thinking about this made me realize that they too share an idol mentorship. Unlike all of the other mentorships presented to us, this is about a respected rivalry. Kuina was his childhood rival, and he insists on keeping his goal alive for her. But Mihawk is a benchmark for Zoro to have the rude awakening that he is very far from where he needs to be if he intends to be a swordsman whose name is known in the heavens. Zoro might have the strength and knowledge to beat down above average bounties, but he won't go far if he thinks that he's at the top of his game. Like anyone looking to hone their craft, it's best to adapt the mentality that we must always continue to learn. Stagnation is death, and death would mean ultimately giving up. I'm looking forward to Zoro progressing and giving Mihawk a run for his money eventually. But it isn't just this blossoming rivalry that made me tear up. It's the fact that even on his absolute last leg, Zoro would raise his sword and promise to Luffy that he would never taste defeat in front of him again. He would never, and I mean never, let him down. If Luffy is to be the king of pirates, Zoro is to be the king of swordsmen. Two kings seeking their kingdom, and the only thing that can stop them is their physical limitations, because their spirit is on a whole other level. If that isn't inspiring, I don't really know what the fuck is. The only emotional moment that didn't grab me entirely was when Nami abandons the crew and goes after the bounty with the Going Merry. I think if it wasn't painfully obvious that she comes back, I would probably be more upset. But I also know that this is the setup to bring the crew into Arlong Park. And now that I've talked about most of the crew, I might as well take the time to talk about Nami. We haven't had Nami's backstory entirely explained, but we do know that she hates pirates because they took someone dear to her. I imagine a more emotionally definitive moment will be explored relatively soon, and I hope to have more to say about her in the next video. But as it currently stands, my opinion of Nami is that she seems to be the most level-headed of the group. She is an essential glue that holds the fabric of the Straw Hats together. Her skill set strength revolves around the idea that she's a thief and a navigator, but we've gotten to know that she's sort of a jack of all trades. When Johnny and Yosaku arrive on the Going Merry after Syrup Village, Nami is quick to identify Yosaku's ailment and provides him with the lime juice to treat his scurvy. She could probably exist on her own without the boys, but I don't think they'd be so lucky. But that's just as well because they're better as a team. We've discussed the whole crew, but we've left out the most important person, Monkey D. Luffy. In my previous video I talked about how I've never really understood the hype behind Luffy, and that I was hoping to have a better perception of the character. I'm very happy to admit that I've changed my mind about Luffy. He deserves all of the hype, and then some. For how early I am into the story, I can already see why he's so inspiring to not only fans, but to the people he meets. Luffy has a determination like no other, or as Zeph would refer to it, his grit. Luffy does not believe in compromising himself for others. He might have everyone's goals in mind, but I think he believes in crossing those finish lines together. He holds himself to the highest of standards, and he makes sure that everyone around him does exactly the same. If pirates were meant to be despicable pieces of shit, Luffy is the pirate that would break the mold. It's easy to mistake that Luffy might be a goofy asshole, but that's only in personality. At his very core, he's an excellent fighter, not only in physical strength, but in mental power. When the chips are down, he manages to dig deep and overcome all odds. During his fight with Buggy, he can't seem to understand how to actually deal damage, but thanks to some observation and weirdly tickling his feet, he realizes that he can damage Buggy's limbs that he leaves behind, and with the help of Nami, they send his ass off to space with a Gomu Gomu no rocket. On the North Beach fight with Kuro, Luffy shows us that his level of determination is not to be taken lightly. Kuro makes the fatal mistake of doing two things: killing his own crew and insulting Luffy's desire to be the king of the pirates. Luffy didn't even give a shit about that crew, and he still felt bad about the way Kuro treated them, because there is no excuse for a captain to kill his crew. This level of frustration combined with Kuro's shit talk led to an explosive knockout. When Luffy sees an injustice of some sort, it buffs him. When Luffy hears someone doubt him, it buffs him. He doesn't internalize what other people think about him. He inhales the bullshit they throw and exhales the reason they'll regret doubting him. When Don Krieg pulled out a new piece of overpowered bullshit, Luffy found his way around it, because that's just the kind of dude Luffy is. If he's going out, he's going on his terms. DK might have had spikes and poison gas, but he never even came close to the level of heart that Luffy has. DK's strength was entirely external, while Luffy was internal. Your number one mistake against this wacky rubber man is underestimating him, and if you do, you'll be looking at him from the ground on your last breath. Speaking of things you should never do in front of Luffy, don't touch his fucking hat. Like me, just don't touch my fucking hat. Seriously, it's not gonna end well. Luffy's hat is his treasure, and identifying each character's treasure or the things they hold dearly is a major point of early East Blue. Luffy has his hat. Zoro has Kuina's sword. Shushu has his owner's store. Mayor Boodle has his town. Sanji has his love for the All Blue and his knives. Usopp has Kaya and his village, and I imagine maybe even Going Merry, though I think that will be a sentiment shared amongst the entire crew. And there's one more person with a treasure that brings this theme together. That's right, I'm talking about Gaimon, the man stuck in the chest. Gaimon might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but I'd argue that he's an important piece to the early development of Luffy, and this is why I was so shocked to hear that people skip this section of the manga and the anime. Gaimon serves as a cautionary tale, a story about a man who let his desires cloud his judgment and how it led to his downfall of living on a strange island. But it isn't all sad for Gaimon. When life looked like it was too far into the pit to get out, Gaimon embraced his new life and became a protector of the strange island and the animals that inhabit it. He found his new treasure. Gaimon might not have the material goods that he seeked, but instead he found his home. Life gave him lemons, and he sure as fuck made some lemonade. When Luffy finds out that the treasure Gaimon had been guarding all along was actually empty, he didn't have the heart to tell Gaimon because he thought it might crush him. But Gaimon reads through this kind act and tells him that he suspected it all along. But Gaimon doesn't take this as a defeat. He keeps his head up because he's accepted his new purpose for so long that gold really doesn't mean shit to him. The reason this chapter is so perfectly placed after Syrup Village and before Baratie is that it's the essential side dish for the character development we're being served. 3 back-to-back events about the importance of fighting for your beliefs, ambitions, and holding on to the things we love. Gaimon is the reminder to chase those things, but to also remind yourself to stay grounded in reality. Greed will punish you, sorrow might mold you, but learning to love yourself will heal you, and that's pretty fucking powerful. In a manga about pirates, it's funny to think that sometimes treasure isn't just gold and jewels, but the events that shape this cast into the better people they all strive to become. These characters don't bend to the will of the world around them. They do their best to break those expectations and carve their paths into history. The only thing that'll stop them is death. And even then, they're going to make sure their tales are talked about for hundreds of years to come. On a much lighter note, before we get to predictions, I have a character that I need to cook the fuck out of. One of the biggest assholes in all of East Blue, Kaya's butler Mary. This stupid motherfucker has the audacity to shoot Usopp and get a ship named after him. Yes, I know that he was under the influence of Kuro, but I don't really see a valid reason for this sheep-looking asshole to pull ye ol' flintlock on Usopp. Kaya already slapped the shit out of Usopp when he tried to grab her hand, but this stupid fuck goes for the kill shot. Luckily Mary is a fucking scrub and only hits his arm, but he can still go get fucked. Spoiler warning, I heard he does get dusted in the live action series. I'm not usually down with live action adaptations of anime, but bravo Netflix, rest in piss asshole. What makes it worse is after this dickhead has a monument erected in his name, he explains to Kaya that he knew Usopp's backstory the entire time. He knew that Usopp's tall tales were a form of grieving, and he just thought he should hold on to that. Mary should probably hold on to these nuts next time too, you fucking punk. I don't think they explained who named the ship, but gauging Mary on his previous actions, he's definitely the type of pompous asshole to name a ship after himself. When Kaya gave Luffy that ship, she might as well have just said, "Hey Usopp, thanks for helping us out. We're giving you and your buddies a ship built in the image of a dickhead who shot you." Now Usopp has to wake up every day on this boat and see this furry fuck's face. Like if Mary had died, maybe I could understand naming the ship after him, but his greatest achievement in life is being a fucking bitch. I brought this to Mugi's attention and he was like, "I'm sure Usopp doesn't hold that grudge anymore," and I said, "Fuck that, I'll hold it for him." Anyway, I think it's time to begin to some predictions for the future. Luffy still has a few more members he needs for the crew. I know his biggest desires are for a cook and a musician. Luckily he got Sanji to be a chef, but he's gotta find some entertainment. But more importantly, Luffy should probably find someone in medicine because there's no way he can just always rely on Nami. Like I said earlier, I think we'll be getting Nami's big backstory explanation as she's the only one of the crew who hasn't had her past deep dived. Each section seems to get better and better. Oda was clearly perfecting his skill set as he moved to each story beat. So far Baratie is my favorite of the sections I've read, but I'm expecting Arlong Park to eclipse that. I discussed in the preview video that I was most excited for Thriller Bark, which is miles away at this point. But my most anticipated arc in closer proximity is probably Alabasta. Luffy has been incredibly strong-willed and kinda just waltzing through his life at this moment, but I imagine even Luffy will be subject to inner turmoil that throws him off his game. I eagerly await getting to meet each new character and seeing the different sections of the world. I've seen sea monsters and weird creatures, but I need to see more of the devil fruit users. I need to see what bizarre Oda shit concocted and how the fuck Luffy will overcome them. Luffy and crew are in the minor leagues at the moment, but I'm sure the Grand Line will be a rude awakening like no other. Well then, I think we're ready to wrap this up so I can start reading the next section of chapters. Coming up next will be chapters 69 through 100, Arlong Park to Logtown. Until next time, don't get your feet wet, and I'll see you in Arlong Park.